I never told my wife that I secretly owned nearly half of her father's company, a stake worth over $15 billion. For 23 years, she only knew me as an ordinary consultant with an old car and a small apartment. Then one Tuesday, she invited me to dinner with her parents. I accepted, curious to see how they would treat someone they believed was insignificant. The smiles were polite. The questions were sharp. And then in the middle of the meal, her father slid a leather envelope across the table. That was the moment I realized this dinner had never truly been about family. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment below and let me know where are you watching this from and what time is it there right now. I'm curious how far this story is traveling. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning and I knew exactly what it meant. I was 53 years old. I'd been married to Margot for 23 years, and in that time I'd learned to read the temperature of her silence. This particular silence, the kind that came with her staring at her phone while her coffee went cold, meant her parents were planning something. "Let me guess," I said from across our kitchen table in Cambridge. "Your mother." Margot looked up and the expression on her face confirmed it. She slid her phone across the scarred wooden table we'd bought at a yard sale 19 years ago. The message was brief, formal, and chilling in its precision. "Dinner. Friday, 7 p.m. Important family matter. Mother." When my parents get this formal, Margot said quietly, someone usually gets hurt. She wasn't wrong. Theodora Stone didn't do casual. Every interaction was calculated, every word weighted. A dinner invitation that arrived via text message instead of a phone call. That was a business transaction, not a family gathering. "We're going," I said. "Maxwell, I want to see what they're planning." What Margot didn't know, what she couldn't know, because I'd spent 18 months carefully not telling her, was that I'd been waiting for this moment. Watching. Preparing. I'd seen it building in the small comments at Thanksgiving, in the way Randolph Stone looked at me like I was a problem that needed solving, in the way their daughter Ainsley had started treating me like an embarrassment rather than a father. They thought they had the power in this relationship. They thought I was exactly what I appeared to be, a 53-year-old logistics consultant who drove a 7-year-old Honda and lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood their landscaper wouldn't visit. What they didn't know was this. 27 years ago, I'd inherited $500,000 from my grandfather. Most people would have bought a nice car or taken an expensive vacation. I bought stock in a struggling shipping company, run by a man named Randolph Stone, who was drowning in debt from the Asian shipping crisis and couldn't secure financing from anyone who'd looked at his books. I'd studied that company for months before making my first purchase. His fundamentals were solid. His roots were profitable. He just needed capital. So I started buying quietly through layers of corporate entities and offshore trusts that couldn't be traced back to me. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. By the time I met Margot at a charity auction, I owned 31%. By our wedding, 42%. Today, I owned 47% of Stone Maritime and Logistics Corporation. At current valuations, my position was worth approximately $15 billion. Randolph Stone worked for me. He just didn't know it. "Maxwell." Margot's voice pulled me back. She was watching me with those eyes that had seen me through everything. Graduate school, career changes, her parents' endless disapproval. "Promise me you won't let them bully you." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I promise they'll see exactly who I am." She squeezed my fingers, trusting me the way she'd trusted me for 23 years. The way she'd trusted me when I'd asked her to live modestly to build a life on something more than appearance. She'd never questioned it, never demanded explanations. Friday would bring the confrontation I'd been preparing for, and this time I wouldn't stay silent. Friday arrived with the kind of cold November evening that makes Boston feel unforgiving. I drove our Honda through Cambridge as twilight settled over the city, Margot silent beside me, her hand resting on the center console where I could reach it. We'd made this drive before dozens of times over 23 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like crossing a border into enemy territory. Cambridge slipped past the windows, brick buildings, graduate students hurrying against the cold. The comfortable shabbiness of our neighborhood where professors and artists lived side by side with working families. Then we crossed into Wellesley and the world changed. The streets widened. The houses grew larger, set back behind stone walls and perfect lawns even winter couldn't diminish. This was old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew it was there. The kind that looked at my 7-year-old Honda and saw failure instead of choice. Margot's hand tightened on mine as I turned onto her parents' street. The Stone estate sat on 3 acres that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Even in the fading light, it looked more like a museum than a home. All columns in symmetry and the kind of architectural perfection that said, "We matter to everyone who passed by." I pulled into the circular driveway. Before I could turn off the engine, the front door opened. Florence stood in the doorway, the housekeeper, not Theodora. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a transaction. "They're really doing this," Margot whispered. "Let them," I said. Florence greeted us with professional courtesy, taking our coats without meeting my eyes. Then Randolph appeared in the foyer, 72 years old, and still carrying himself like a man who'd built empires, which I supposed he thought he had. "Maxwell?" His handshake was designed to dominate the grip too firm held too long. "Margot, sweetheart." Theodora emerged from the living room, 69 and elegant, in the way that took hours of daily maintenance to achieve. She offered Margot an embrace, then turned to me with an air kiss that landed somewhere near my cheek, without actually making contact. "So good of you to come," she said, her voice suggesting it was anything but good. "Mom, Dad, they're here." Ainsley's voice came from deeper in the house, casual bored. I found her in the living room, 20 years old, and scrolling through her phone like we weren't worth looking up for. "Hi, honey," Margot said softly. "Oh." Ainsley glanced up for half a second. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." "Dad," said like she was acknowledging a stranger. I remembered her at 7, asking me why we didn't live in a big house like Grandma and Grandpa. I'd tried to explain about values, about building something real instead of impressive. She'd nodded, but even then I could see she didn't understand. Or didn't want to. "Shall we?" Randolph gestured toward the dining room. The table was set for 5. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier. China plates that probably cost more than our monthly rent sat at each place. And the seating arrangement told me everything about how this evening would go. Randolph at the head. Theodora to his right. Ainsley beside her grandmother already aligned. Margot and I across from them, physically separated, outnumbered, isolated. We took our seats. A moment later, Florence appeared with the first course. As she set the plates down, I could feel it building the trap they'd spent days preparing, but they had no idea who they were trying to catch. Randolph raised his wine glass. The crystal caught the light as he smiled. "To family," he said. The word felt like a threat. The first course came and went with the kind of forced pleasantries that precede an execution. Randolph asked about my work with the careful condescension of a man asking a child about finger painting. Theodora commented on the weather. Ainsley scrolled through her phone between bites, contributing nothing until her grandmother shot her a look that suggested even contempt required proper timing. The main course arrived some kind of fish that probably cost more per ounce than I spent on groceries in a week. That's when Randolph really got started. "We just finalized the new Atlantic shipping route expansion," he said, cutting his fish with surgical precision. 10-year project. $2 billion in investment. Takes real vision to see opportunities like that. He said it like he was explaining quantum physics to someone who'd barely passed high school math. I approved that funding, I thought, watching him perform. Every single dollar came from my holdings. "You're lecturing me about a project I greenlit 18 months ago." But I just nodded and said, "Sounds ambitious." The words seemed to disappoint him. He'd wanted engagement, maybe argument. Instead, I gave him nothing. Theodora picked up the thread. "Margot, did I mention I ran into Tristan Aldridge last week?" Her voice was light casual, the way people sound when they're about to stab you. "He's doing remarkably well. Just bought a place in Beacon Hill. Absolutely stunning property." Margot's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "I'm happy with my life, Mother." "Of course you are, sweetheart." Theodora's smile could have cut glass. "I'm just saying it's interesting how life turns out, isn't it? The choices we make." Across the table, Ainsley finally looked up from her phone. "Grandfather's given me real responsibilities now," she said, and I couldn't tell if she was talking to me or through me. "I'm coordinating with the logistics team on the new terminal integration. Real work. Strategic work." "That's wonderful, honey," Margot said, trying to catch our daughter's eye. But Ainsley was looking at me now, really looking at me for the first time all evening. "Some of us are actually building careers, you know, not just consulting." She said the word like it was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Ainsley." Margot's voice had an edge I recognized, the one that came out when she was defending me to her family for the 1,000th time in 23 years. "What, I'm just being honest." Ainsley turned to her mother. Don't you ever wish you'd made different choices? Don't you ever wonder what life would be like if you'd married someone with actual ambition? The silence that followed was absolute. Margot's face had gone white. That's your father you're talking about. Ainsley shrugged, like she'd commented on the weather instead of implying her mother's entire marriage was a mistake. I stayed perfectly still, which I could see infuriated them more than any response I might have given. They wanted me to react, to defend myself, to prove I cared what they thought. But I'd spent 23 years learning to read this family. Tonight wasn't about conversation, it was about positioning. They were circling, testing, preparing for something. Dessert came and went. Florence cleared the plates with practiced efficiency. For a moment there was silence, the kind that feels like held breath. Then Randolph cleared his throat and reached beneath his chair. When his hand emerged, it held a leather folder that would change everything. The leather folder landed on the table between wine glasses and crystal, with a soft thud that silenced the room. Randolph slid it toward me with the confidence of a man who had closed 1,000 deals. Inside, stapled with $500 precision, lay an annulment agreement. Clipped to the front was a check for $350,000. Maxwell Randolph said, leaning back like a judge about to rule, "I'll be direct. You married above your station. That's not an insult. It's a fact. Margot could have had anyone. She could have had Tristan. We tried to accept this marriage." Margot stiffened beside me. Theodora leaned forward. "We can't watch our daughter struggle financially because of pride. This solves everything. That check," Randolph continued tapping it, "is more than you'd make in 10 years as a consultant. Sign the annulment, take the money, and move on. You'll be better off, and Margot can return to a life suited to her background." The silence pressed against my ears. Margot stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "This is insane. You can't buy people." "Margot, sit down," Randolph said, voice heavy with decades of command. "The adults are talking." "I'm 48 years old, Dad." Her voice cracked. "My husband is right here while you're trying to." He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, certain he'd already won. Then Ainsley spoke. "Mom." Her voice was calm. "Grandmother's right. You deserve better." Margot turned toward our daughter, disbelief warring with hope. "Ainsley, Dad, be honest." Ainsley met my eyes, 20 years old, and sure of herself. "You're holding Mom back. You live in a tiny apartment. You drive that embarrassing car. Everyone knows you're not good enough for her." She said it like a simple truth. "Take the money and go," she added. "You'd be doing everyone a favor," Ainsley Margot cried. "That's your father," Ainsley turned to her mother, almost gentle. "Mom, you could be with someone like Tristan, someone with a real future, someone who wouldn't make you choose between family and marriage, someone who wouldn't embarrass you." Margot broke, then crying, the way people do when something inside finally shatters. I stayed still. I'd known this moment was coming for 18 months, but knowing isn't the same as living it. Watching my daughter measure my worth and discard me hurt more than anything her parents said. I had loved Margot without conditions through lean years and quiet victories, believing respect grew from patience. I'd swallowed every slight from her parents, every smile that weighed my income before my character. I thought time would soften them. I thought my daughter saw more. In that moment I understood how neatly money edits a story, how easily comfort masquerades as wisdom. They weren't offering a choice. They were erasing me. And the cruelest part wasn't the check. It was realizing that love measured in numbers had already been declared insufficient. It felt final, irreversible, like a verdict delivered long before I ever entered the room, and no appeal could change what they believed about me then. I picked up the check and examined it, letting them believe I was tempted. "That's generous," I said quietly. Randolph smiled. I set the check down and took out my phone. Before I respond, I said I need to make a quick call. Randolph frowned. "What does your attorney have to do with this?" I looked at him carefully. Everything I said. I dialed Desmond Garrett, the attorney who had managed my interests for 27 years, and put the phone on speaker. I placed it in the center of the table beside the torn check and waited. "Maxwell," Desmond said calmly, "I've been expecting your call." "Desmond, I'm having dinner with the Stone family. Please explain the current ownership structure of Stone Maritime and Logistics." "Of course," he replied without pause. "Stone Maritime and Logistics Corporation has 100 million shares outstanding. The largest shareholder is Brennan Holdings, LLC, which owns 47 million shares, or 47% of the company. Randolph frowned. What is this supposed to Desmond continued, unfazed. The second largest shareholder is Randolph Stone, personally holding 18 million shares, or 18%. The remaining 35% is divided among institutional and private investors. The silence was complete. Desmond and I said, "Who owns Brennan Holdings?" "Brennan Holdings is wholly owned by Maxwell Brennan," he answered. "It was established 27 years ago, using an inheritance. At today's closing price, the Stone Maritime position is valued at approximately $15 billion. Theodora's wine glass slipped from her hand and rolled across the table. Ainsley's phone fell to the floor. Randolph stared at the speaker as if reality had shifted. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Brennan Holdings is—" "I thought it was an institutional investor," I said. "You never asked because the money always arrived when you needed it." I stood and walked around the table until I faced him. 27 years ago, your company was collapsing. The Asian shipping crisis destroyed you. No bank would finance you. He tried to speak and failed. I was 26. I'd inherited $500,000 from my grandfather. I studied your business for months. Your fundamentals were strong. You just needed capital. My voice stayed level. So I bought in quietly through entities you couldn't trace. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. When I met Margot, 31. By our wedding, 42. Today, 47. Every expansion you credit to your leadership, the Atlantic routes, port modernization, the logistics software that saved you in 2015, was funded with my capital. I let the words settle. You work for me, Randolph. You just didn't know it. Then I turned to Ainsley. She sat frozen, face-pale, tears gathering. "Ainsley," I said gently, "I wanted to know whether my daughter valued character or wealth. Whether you loved me for who I am or for what you believed I lacked. Tonight I have my answer. Your position at Stone Maritime is terminated effective immediately. Perhaps it's time you learned what a real career requires." "Dad," she whispered, "I didn't know." "Would it have mattered?" "It wouldn't have. I lifted the torn check so they could see it. I never wanted your money, Randolph. I wanted family. I wanted to love your daughter without caring about status or inheritance. But you only saw someone you believed was beneath you." I dropped the check pieces onto the table. "I've called an emergency board meeting for Monday. The agenda is simple: a vote on the CEO. You'll be removed and professional management will be installed." "This is my company," Randolph shouted. "I built it." "No," I said quietly. "You drove it to the edge of bankruptcy. I saved it. While you sat here trying to buy me away from your daughter." I turned to Margot, still shaking, tears falling freely, and held out my hand. She took it without hesitation. "We have a long drive ahead," I said softly. Behind us, the Stone family sat amid the ruins of everything they believed, and for the first time in 23 years, they finally saw me, clearly. The drive back to Cambridge was only 10 miles, yet it felt like crossing between two different worlds. We walked to the car in silence, the Stone estate glowing behind us like something unreal, part dream, part nightmare. Margot's hand trembled in mine, and I held it tightly as if she were the only solid thing left. The first 10 minutes passed without words. I drove through Wellesley's flawless streets, then onto the highway, while Margot watched the blurred city lights slip past the window. Finally, she spoke softly. "How long have you been planning this?" "I wasn't planning revenge," I said, eyes fixed on the road. Looking at her felt too difficult. "I invested in the company years before I met you. It was just a good decision. But you let them treat you like that," she said, voice breaking. "For 23 years. For 18 months, I tested them deliberately. Before that, I searched for words. I hoped they'd accept me for who I was not, for what I had." "You could have told me," she said, turning toward me. "Any time. Would you have believed I married you only for you?" I asked. "Not for your family or access to power." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe not at first. I needed you to know I chose you when there was nothing to gain, that I stayed when logic said I shouldn't." Silence returned, and Ainsley, her voice cracked. "You let our daughter think." "I let your parents poison her against me," I said. "I thought patience would teach her real values. I was wrong." Tears came then from both of us. I pulled over because the road disappeared behind the blur. "What happens now?" she asked, once we could breathe again. "The company will survive. Randolph may be offered a consulting role, but the control is gone. He'll adapt or walk away." "And us?" I finally turned to face her. "That's your choice." She reached for my hand. "I choose you. I always have. The man who shared that apartment with me for 23 years, that's who I love. Not the billionaire. The man who made coffee every morning and listened without judgment. 20 minutes later, we pulled into our Cambridge lot. After the estate, the building looked small, ordinary, perfect. Inside our apartment, surrounded by 2 decades of shared life, she asked, "What about the money?" "Your foundation," I said. "We'll grow it. And this place, we're keeping it. I don't need a mansion." Monday would bring consequences, but that night in our quiet Cambridge home, we were richer than the Stones had ever been, because we still had each other, honesty, and the life we had chosen together, despite everything. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the weight of consequences. The boardroom at Stone Maritime's headquarters was all glass and steel, a space designed to intimidate. But at 9 a.m. that morning, as I took my seat at the head of the conference table, the seat Randolph had occupied for 40 years, I felt only a quiet certainty about what needed to happen. The emergency meeting lasted 11 minutes. The agenda was simple: a vote on the current CEO's position. The business case was clear: a major shareholder exercising his right to restructure management. There was minimal discussion. These were professionals who understood that personal feelings had no place in fiduciary duty. The vote was 78% in favor of removal. Randolph sat at the far end of the table, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical space. He said nothing, didn't defend himself, didn't argue, didn't even meet anyone's eyes. When the vote concluded and the interim management team was announced, he simply stood and walked out. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Over the next 2 days, my phone collected 12 voicemails from Ainsley. I didn't listen to them. Margot's phone lit up with texts. "Mom, please, I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Please talk to me." She didn't respond. Not yet. By Tuesday evening, Ainsley had apparently realized that without the Stone Maritime connection on her resume, no one was returning her calls. The job market, it seemed, had a way of teaching lessons that 20 years of privilege had obscured. Theodora called Margot 17 times between Monday and Wednesday. Wednesday morning, Margot finally answered. "Please." Theodora's voice came through broken, nothing like the cold society matriarch who'd suggested buying me off. "Let me explain. Let us make this right." "I need time, Mother," Margot said quietly and hung up. That afternoon, a courier arrived at our apartment. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting. Theodora's I recognized from years of formal invitations we'd received and rarely attended. Inside was a letter, 2 pages handwritten on cream stationery. "Margot, I don't expect you to forgive us. What we did was unforgivable. But I need you to know we thought we were protecting you. We were wrong, so terribly, horribly wrong. Your father is devastated. Not about the company, though. That hurts. About losing you. About discovering that the son-in-law he dismissed is the man who saved everything he built. Please, when you're ready, can we talk? I promise. No more envelopes, no more checks. Just a mother who wants to understand the man her daughter married." Margot read it twice, then showed it to me. "Do you think they mean it?" she asked. I thought about that for a long moment. I think they're scared, and sometimes fear makes people honest in ways comfort never could. "What would you do?" "I'd give them 1 chance," I said. 1. But on our terms. In our apartment. No performance of wealth and status. If they can accept us as we are, maybe there's hope. Thursday morning, Margot sent a text. "Dinner. Our place? Friday, 7 p.m. No dress code, no expectations, just family." Theodora's response came within seconds. "Thank you. We'll be there." Friday we made pasta. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate. Just the kind of meal we'd shared 1,000 times in 23 years. No crystal glasses, no china plates, no performance at all. When the doorbell rang at 7 p.m., exactly 1 week after the dinner that had changed everything, I took Margot's hand, and we answered it together. They stood in our doorway looking smaller somehow, as if the week just past had diminished them in ways wealth could never compensate for. Randolph wore jeans and a navy sweater, no tie, no tailored suit, no armor of executive authority. Theodora had chosen simple black slacks and a cream blouse, her only jewelry a wedding ring I'd seen for 23 years, but never really noticed before. No pearls, no diamonds, no performance at all. "Thank you for having us," Randolph said quietly. His voice carried none of the commanding certainty I'd heard across boardroom tables and dinner conversations for over 2 decades. Theodora held a bottle of wine, not from their private collection, just something from a local shop. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered it to Margot. "Come in," Margot said, stepping back. Our Cambridge apartment had never been designed to impress. 800 square feet of comfortable lived-in space with bookshelves lining the walls and photographs documenting 23 years of genuine moments. The living room opened directly into the kitchen. No separate dining room, no staff quarters, no marble or crystal anywhere in sight. Theodora's eyes traveled the space slowly. I watched her take in the worn sofa where Margot and I had spent countless evenings, the small table where we'd shared thousands of meals, the simple artwork we'd chosen together. "This place is lovely," she said finally, and for the first time since I'd known her, her voice held no judgment. "It feels like home." Margot had made pasta nothing elaborate, just the marinara recipe her grandmother had taught her years before I'd ever met her. The scent of garlic and basil filled the small apartment as we sat at the kitchen table, 4 people in a space designed for intimacy rather than performance. "Smells wonderful," Randolph said as Margot served. We ate in awkward silence for several minutes. Then Randolph set down his fork. "Maxwell," he began, his voice careful, "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. I waited. Every dinner where I made you feel small. Every comment about your work, your car, your background. Every time I suggested you weren't enough." He paused, his jaw working. "And that check. Treating you like you were worth exactly $350,000, and not a penny more, when the truth is you're the man who saved my company and loves my daughter with an integrity I failed to recognize." He turned to Margot, and I saw moisture gathering in his eyes. "Margot, I'm sorry I couldn't see what you saw in Maxwell. I'm sorry I valued social position over your happiness. You found a man who loves you for exactly who you are. That's what every father should want. I almost destroyed it because of my own pride." Theodora reached for Margot's hand, tears spilling freely now. "I spent my whole life preparing you for a certain kind of marriage," she said. "When you chose differently, I felt like you were rejecting everything I'd taught you. But you weren't rejecting anything," she continued. "You were choosing something real over something hollow. And Ainsley," Theodora's voice broke, "we poisoned her mind against you both. That's on us." I set down my own fork, meeting Randolph's eyes across the small table. "I accept your apologies," I said quietly. "But accepting doesn't mean forgetting. If we're going to rebuild this, it has to be real. No more judgments based on appearances. No more poison about who deserves whom. And Ainsley, she's 20 years old. She can learn, but she needs to apologize herself when she's ready." Margot squeezed Theodora's hand. "I want my parents back," she said softly. "But I need you to see us. Really see us. Maxwell in jeans is still the man who owns $15 billion. That's the lesson." Randolph nodded slowly. "Could I take you to lunch sometime, Maxwell? Just the 2 of us. Start again." "Lunch sounds good," I replied. "Ainsley sent a letter," Theodora offered carefully. "But she's not ready to face you yet." "When she is," I said, "we'll be here." It wasn't forgiveness yet. Forgiveness would take time. But it was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning is enough. 3 months can reshape a family, a company, and a quiet understanding of what wealth truly means. By February, Stone Maritime stock had climbed 35%. Under professional management led by a CEO I chose not for pedigree, but for proven competence. The company I saved 27 years earlier was finally thriving exactly as I had always believed it could. Randolph now worked only 2 days a week, advising on legacy accounts and institutional relationships. Mostly, though, he listened. He listened to younger executives with sharper tools and to logistics specialists who understood modern supply chains better than he ever had. He sold the Mercedes-bought a Toyota Camry and somehow seemed lighter because of it. The Brennan Family Foundation launched in January with a $75 million endowment. Margot became its director, no longer volunteering for someone else's vision, but building her own. Scholarships for students who wanted business degrees but lacked money. Housing assistance. Job training for people society had already dismissed. "The kids nobody expects to succeed," she said while drafting the mission statement. "Those are the ones who will change everything." Every 2 weeks, Randolph and Theodora came to our apartment for dinner. Sometimes they cooked. Theodora discovered she enjoyed it when no staff watched and no performance was required. They asked about books, not deals. Theodora volunteered 15 hours a week at the foundation using her social connections for something that actually mattered. 6 weeks ago, a letter arrived written in Ainsley's careful, uncertain handwriting. "Dad, I'm finally learning what you tried to teach me. I'm sorry it took 20 years and losing everything to understand. She had taken an entry-level marketing job at a small tech startup. Nothing glamorous, nothing inherited. She rented a modest apartment in Somerville, paid her own bills, and rode the T to work like everyone else. She met Margot for coffee twice, but she still wasn't ready to see me. She's getting there, Margot told me. 20 years of poisoning takes time to wash away, I said. I can wait. Tonight, after another Friday dinner, after Randolph and Theodora left, with real smiles, and promises to return, Margot and I stood on our small balcony overlooking Cambridge. The city lights shimmered below us, countless lives unfolding in apartments, much like our own. Do you ever regret letting them humiliate you for so long? She asked. Never, I said, pulling her closer. Because now I know. Your parents love you more than their pride. You chose me for who I am, and I don't need permission to be myself. Who are you, Maxwell Brennan? I smiled. I'm a 53-year-old logistics consultant. I'm a billionaire investor. I'm your husband. And I'm the man who proved the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones nobody notices. She kissed me as the city glowed below. Somewhere Randolph was relearning his own company from the ground up. Somewhere Theodora planned her next volunteer shift. Somewhere Ainsley worked, late, building something real with her own hands. Here in the modest apartment we chose on purpose, we were rich in the only ways that matter. That envelope did not change everything. The check did not. What mattered was the moment people revealed who they truly were and what you chose to do with that truth. I chose love. I chose honesty. I chose to prove that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all. When nobody expects you to win, victory tastes sweeter. My name is Maxwell Brennan. This is proof that character matters more than money, love matters more than status, and the greatest victories are the ones nobody saw coming. Stay humble, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small, simply because they cannot see how powerful you truly are. Looking back at my story, I realized God gave me 23 years to prepare for one 15-minute moment. Some people call me patient. I call it faith, that the God who sees everything would reveal truth in his perfect timing. Don't wait as long as I did to show your worth. God doesn't call us to hide our light under a bushel forever. I let my family suffer 18 months of humiliation when one honest conversation could have prevented it. That was my mistake. Here's what I learned. God gave you talents not to prove yourself to others, but to serve his purpose. I thought I was teaching Randolph and Theodora a lesson. The truth God was teaching me about pride, forgiveness, and that revenge belongs to him alone. If you're in my situation, underestimated, disrespected, carrying a secret that could change everything, ask yourself, am I waiting for God's timing, or am I feeding my own ego? This true story taught me that Grandpa's stories about honor and patience are beautiful, but true story, wisdom also says, protect your family first. And this true story proves that when God orchestrates justice, it's always more perfect than anything we could engineer ourselves. Grandpa's stories from my own father-in-law now include how God humbled him through the son-in-law he despised. Grandpa's stories he tells Ainsley now focus on character, not wealth. These Grandpa stories became our family's redemption. Don't hide who you are to prove a point. Serve God. Love your family. Let him handle the rest.